Hello, World War Zero community. This is Amanda Little, a professor at Vanderbilt University, and I am delighted to be here with Governor Kasich and Ann Hoskins of Sunrun at this keystone event for Earth Week. We are discussing the building of the clean economy, and I'd love to start with just a brief 3-minute intro from each member of this conversation, in which you share your vision for the clean energy economy, how you define this, and what you see as your role in building it. Let's start with you, Governor Kasich.
Let me just say that let's talk about record, which I think really matters. As governor of the state, we recognize the importance of doing things that were consistent with improving the environment, while at the same time being able to help and provide for economic growth. So we were able to reduce emissions in our state by about 30% fundamentally because of the development of natural gas that came through the process of fracking. Now, at the same time that we were fracking, we had very strict limits around that, and including the capture of methane, which I think made a huge difference. But the growth of gas in our state away from coal plants has really yielded great results. In addition to that, also very favorable towards the development of renewables, according, of course, including Ann's company at Sunrun, solar and wind, and they're very important to us. And you know, as a result of those practices, developing renewables, making sure that we develop natural gas, we had very good results. And so I'm proud that in Ohio we were able to be, you know, ahead of most people, and at the same time, because of the development of shale gas, we also were able to create jobs connected to it. So it was economic growth, environmental improvement, sort of a win-win-win. And I was really proud of being able to do that. I got involved with World War Zero because John Kerry asked me if I wanted to be part of a group. Arnold Schwarzenegger, myself, and John are realizing they need somebody who could lift a lot of weight. Arnold was, you know, he decided to ask me to participate. I thought it was a great opportunity to work with John and with Arnold. And our whole purpose is to not only make people aware of the issue of the environment, but my role to some degree is to help Republicans, conservatives come to embrace this whole notion, and also to explain to business leaders through you know, the standards of improving the environment to help them to be able to not only do that, but also to be able to market it in a very positive way. So it's you know, it's been very good. That's through the area of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, where we've been able to see improvements in the business community. So anyway, it's been great experience working with John, World War Zero, doing what we did, our team back when I was governor, and we made progress, and I'm excited about what the future can hold here.
Thank you. Ann Hoskins, we would love to hear your intro and vision and role in achieving that vision.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Governor. I'm really excited to participate in World War Zero's webinar today. I'm Ann Hoskins. I'm the Chief Policy Officer at Sunrun. Sunrun is the largest distributed solar and battery company in the country. We've grown tremendously over the last, I'd say, 12 years that we've existed. And our vision is really to actually simply make a planet run by the sun. That's our vision, our goal. It's what we're working towards every day. We see we're at a critical time right now as we're trying to figure out, you know, how do we meet these aggressive climate and clean energy goals? And one of the concerns I have that I'd like to talk about today is everybody seems to think because the goal is so big and so the challenge so significant, then we need to go big, right? Everything has to be these large projects, large transmission. Those things take time and they cost billions of dollars. And so sort of consistent with what the governor was saying, you know, you have to really think about how do you do this efficiently? How do you do it so you can give people power to be part of this solution? And we believe that a key part of this that is partly being overlooked in some of the national dialogue right now is to look at distributed solutions. We've done studies. We can see that if you can combine distributed solutions along with those utility scale solutions, you're going to end up with a more efficient system. And the reason is because you're generating the power clean power where it's being used. You're using the built environment. And this is very consistent with what I would say are very conservative principles. And one of the exciting things about working in distributed solar is that it is very bipartisan. We have a very large, we have a good number of supporters in South Carolina, other parts of the country that actually really want independence that clean power on their roofs can bring them. I want to talk a little bit when we get into it later about Texas and that recent situation and the fact that we had customers who had solar and batteries who were able to power through that terrible storm, and the potential we have now to actually aggregate power, work together as a community, and help bring a more reliable and resilient system. So very excited to be here and to share this sort of more distributed vision with people who are listening on this day after Earth Day.
Amanda, can I ask Ann a question here?
Of course.
Ann, tell me about the battery technology you have, because one of the big challenges we have in the development of renewables, of course, is the issue of storage. And you mentioned, very interesting, what you found in Texas. So because we've got a long way to go on battery technology, and there's also the issue of how you're able to extract lithium and the damage that causes to the environment. But so we need a lot of R&D. How does that work in Texas in terms of a family that has a solar panel on their roof? How do they store? How much can they store? How long can it last?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. Yes, and right now we have about 16,000 customers across the country who have solar and batteries. This is really relatively new in the last couple of years, right? We've started to combine. It really started out in Hawaii, California, Puerto Rico, and now it's expanded recently, states like Texas, Massachusetts, and we're trying to go, across the country. And the way that it works is that you have the solar panels, and the batteries tend to be, and some of you may have heard of, Tesla has a power wall, LG is another provider. So there's a few key battery providers. It gets installed right on the side of your house or in your garage, and they can store depending on how much you're trying to back up. So there's options. There's the whole house backup. There are other batteries, the LG battery, where you can pick your key elements that you need backed up. So if you're really concerned for backup about your refrigerator, your computer charger, it can last for 8, 10 more hours, right? Yep. If you're trying to back up everything, and you have a huge energy usage, it'll be less. But we found, I'm out here in California, and, I'm a transplant from the mid-Atlantic my whole life and Northeast. And when I came out here, I had just experienced all of those Superstorm Sandy, experienced derecho in Maryland, where I was a regulator. And I came out and I said to Sunrun, we got to get batteries and we got to get them to mid-Atlantic because people have been outages and there's a huge demand. And then what did we find? Fires. We've had these, excessive fires. And then obviously Texas with this, unexpected awful storm a few months ago. And what has happened is customers are able to actually, because you have a battery, you're able to disconnect from the grid and you're able to continue to operate. So you've got your solar generating during the day. It then stores power in the battery. And then when the sun goes down, as long as you're you're not, if you have, 5 TVs on, you're going to have a problem, right? But if you're focused on your key needs, your essential needs, and an emergency, powers you through the night. And we had families in Texas that powered through for 3 or 4 days because when the, next morning sun comes up, then you've got your battery being charged again. So it's really quite amazing how much progress has been made in a very short period of time. And we're really optimistic.
Well, I drive a Tesla and I have a charging operation in my house. It's rudimentary. It's a slow charger, so I have to charge overnight. And the ability to charge or the ability to store is really one of the keys to effective development of renewables, as I know Amanda's aware. But to hear that, and I hadn't thought about, on a day-to-day basis, this, like in Texas or whatever, the sun comes up. I've got it. Pretty interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's,
and if I'm not mistaken, cars may eventually become a kind of supplemental backup battery as well.
Yes, so there's a lot of work being done on what you would call sort of two-way charging, vehicle to grid. I don't think it's there yet for most, but, our view on, so we have solar and batteries, right? But our view is that for electrification, when people are talking about wanting to have heat pump water heaters, heat pump, heaters, that in order to get that, or even folks who are interested in converting to electric stoves, right? There's a lot of that talk out here, certainly in the West. So for that to happen, you really need to think about how are you upgrading the main panels and how are you actually incorporating solar and batteries to really fuel electrification. And that's part of the dialogue that I hope groups like World War Zero can help get out there, because I think most people are not aware. This is still pretty new. And the most exciting part to me is not just the backup to the individual, it's the fact that we can now aggregate those batteries, and we're creating these, we call them virtual power plants. You can aggregate 1,000 batteries. And as a result of it, we are working with some communities to talk about being the alternative. So when they have to shut down a power plant, they don't have to create a new gas-fired power plant or certainly coal-fired power plant, but instead they can aggregate these batteries and be the alternative peaking supply. So it's really exciting.
So interesting. I want to go back to you, Governor Kasich, and ask you about what states can do. I know states like Ohio have been instrumental in building the clean energy economy via strong renewable portfolio standards and other means. What more can and must states do to speed the shift away from fossil fuels?
Well, I think one thing that would be good is, we talk about EVs, and we need fast charging stations. I mean, I can tell you that there is no question that there's range anxiety, and I think it holds back people's ability to be able to buy electric cars. The first question I get from people when they see how far does it go? How quick can you charge? All those kinds of things. There's not enough of it. Secondly, I think we have to also pay attention to water. And that's the issue of runoffs into our streams, into our lakes. That has been a semi-war between myself and at one point the agriculture community didn't want really any changes. And it's a little frustrating because farmers do want to take care of their land. It requires a good plan in terms of how you are able to maintain the plan and not cause the runoff. But this issue of algae blooms is a really big issue in our country, not just in Ohio. Could have made more progress on that. But the other thing is to continue to urge people to move away from the coal-fired plants and to rely more on gas. Now, in our state, we're we deregulated, and whenever there's an effort by politicians to re-regulate at the request of the utility companies, it creates a real problem for people who want to come in and invest and let the market determine the supply of gas. But I think at the national level, I think when it comes to, for example, I listened to Ann talk, we don't have a modern grid. So if people do want to generate their own power through solar or wind, there's not an ability to upload it. So the grid only works in one direction. The ability to have a modern grid where renewables can be sent up to the grid to be used and shared by other people makes sense. I think a lot more research and development. I think states could even perhaps, universities are not very good at commercializing, but I think efforts that can be made by universities to join with perhaps our national labs, which also aren't great at all this, but to be able to engage in basic research, I think would be really terrific in terms of a way forward.
And are there any other regulatory measures that you could think should happen at the state level?
Well, we had a regulatory environment around renewables. The fact that we had to meet certain standards. Our legislature wanted to get rid of it. I had a veto it the first time. I told them I'll veto it every time. But I think it gets down also to being able to convince members of the legislatures all across America about what's at stake here. And I think Ann said something really important in this, and that is we don't have to hit a grand slam home run to be able to realize that we can make improvements in the environment. I mean, what holds us back is the sense that if we go full bore, whole hog on this, I'm going to lose my job. It's going to be disruptive to everything. And I think there are ways in which we can move forward that would settle people down. the discussion of a carbon tax and what you do with the proceeds of that can really matter. But I think those are good starts. The grid, renewables, storage, EVs, those are the kinds of things, and the move to natural gas as a transition. The other thing I found very interesting, and you've covered for a lot of different people, Rolling Stone, the Washington Post, and all that, and you know that throughout just not that many years ago, the political left was opposed to nuclear power. There was nothing worse. They were going to march and shut all these plants down. Now they're embracing it because they realize you have to have baseload. And that's the one question, that the one issue I have is Ann talks about having 1,000 batteries and all this. Now, I think you do have to have fundamental baseload, because when things go bad, you've got to have a way in which for people to have power. And it may not all be able to be generated through renewables at this point.
I want to talk about carbon tax and baseload, but first, Anne, the jobs in the solar and wind sectors alone already outnumber those in coal and gas in 30 states. I'm curious as to whether you think the private sector is already winning over fossil fuels.
Well, I think we're definitely winning over coal, right? I mean, we're just seeing the economics of, new plants, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but, the new investments in power plants in the last few years have been, greater for renewable resources, centralized wind, centralized power, centralized solar, than any kind of new, certainly coal plants, and even in most parts of the country, new gas plants as well. So I think we're seeing that just the economics alone, continue to improve. The governor is right that this all has to be done with good planning to make sure that you've got a system that's going to be reliable. And I do believe that, batteries have a lot of potential for shifting and providing that firm resource, and that there are, models that will take you out as you're trying to get to those goals in 2030, 2040, 2050, where you are going to be able to move away from gas plants as well as the coal plants. And you really need to, based on the analysis of what we need to get down to the climate challenge that we have. But there's a ways to go with batteries. I think there is the resurgence of interest in nuclear and other sorts of clean power, whether it's hydro, et cetera. And our view on this is that it's going to take a lot of different approaches to meet this challenge. One of the reasons that I think that the distributed option that we offer is so valuable is that you can do it quickly. It may be small initially, house by house or school by school or, building by building, but you don't have those potentially controversial and very large challenges of, building a transmission line across the plains of people that don't think they're going to benefit. I mean, we have, decades of experience of the challenges there. And it concerns me when everybody is kind of jumping to these solutions without realizing that we have other ones that we know can work and that can engage the public. One of the exciting things about home solar is that when you get a customer who has home solar, or a customer like the governor who has an electric vehicle, they then become more bought into the whole idea and the viability that we can do something different, right? I mean, who thought 5 years ago, Governor, that, so many people out here are driving these Teslas, right? Like, it's becoming, what people want to do now. It happened really quickly, as is happening with solar and batteries. So I just think we need to, look at this, do the planning. I did mention, and I didn't say it in my bio, but I did serve for 3 years as a public service commissioner. I worked closely with the Ohio commissioners at the time, who were fantastic. And, there are so many critical regulatory elements of this if we're really going to make the transition to a clean energy system. One for us is just the essential role that this regulation called net metering has played to really encourage and empower customers to make those investments. Other kinds of what we call demand response rules are ones that encourage customers to share their power, Governor, like back into the system, into the market, into a competitive market. And much of that is done at the states with leaders like Governor Kasich, like, some of the other leaders. Governor Schwarzenegger was a tremendous leader, was the governor in charge when the California Solar Initiative was passed, a decade and a half ago. And so having that state level leadership is going to be essential, even as people think, and it's very exciting that Senator Kerry is, doing the international work now. But I firmly believe that for the United States to do its part in that, it's going to be the states, the local activity, and the people who are going to drive it.
And am I understanding you correctly that you see the potential for solar to become a baseload energy source with improvements in storage?
Well, I think, yes. I mean, if you actually have, certainly you have the large scale storage, depending how that capacity builds. But if you look at our virtual power plants, they are not just available for peaking purposes, right? I mean, if you get 1,000 batteries and you aggregate those, our view is that those can be a source to replace a gas-fired power plant. And those are being considered at this moment. City of LA is looking at it. City of Glendale in California are looking at it. These are plants that are scheduled to go offline. They're old plants. There has to be an alternative, and an alternative that's being looked at is the combination of solar and batteries, because together, when you aggregate them and you use, intelligence, artificial intelligence, you can pull the ones you need at the right time, and you can optimize. And so we have really smart people who are working on how to do that. And there are lots of companies getting into this space now, and it's going to change quickly. And I think that huge opportunities.
Governor, the scientists have said that we need to phase out coal many times faster than we have been, ramp up renewable energy many times faster, transition to electric vehicles many times faster. Do you agree? And how fast does this transition need to be?
Well, look, I think that natural gas is absolutely the transition fuel. And we're not going to be going to 1,000 batteries in Ohio. I mean, we can't, isn't going to work. I mean, we can use wind, we can use some solar, but we also need baseload. And I think there should be a determined effort to phase out coal plants. And I know that some of the utilities here are doing just that. We mentioned earlier about businesses and where they are, with ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues right in front. I just noticed today an article that ExxonMobil's talking about the ability to store carbon. And I mean, sequestering and storing carbon is great, but that's not so easy. It's sort of like battery technology. Yeah, we know we need to have it, but we don't have it. And I'm not sure when we're going to get it. In other words, there's got to be a transition that is real. So do I think we're still going to have coal plants over the next few years? I do. John Kerry just came back from China. China's building more coal plants. Okay, so when we talk about the state of the environment, look at India and you look at China, and you look at the amount of coal, coal usage in the United States, it's on the decline. And it's declining not so much because of regulatory reasons, it's declining because natural gas is cheaper and it is environmentally better, and it's also less expensive. So I think these things, and this is the problem. Right now, we don't have a great environmental movement among the Republicans. Now, there's some of us that are out there, Christy Todd Whitman and Susan Molinari, and there's a number of others, but it's a tough issue. I mentioned earlier about them wanting to eliminate the strict standards on renewable in Ohio as a Republican legislature. So we have a ways to go to convince people there's a way to get this done that's good for the environment, and frankly, can also be something that produces jobs. When I look at the fracking industry, the creation of jobs, when I look at what can be done with sequestering carbon, you got to build pipelines, you got to be able to have places to store it. There's jobs there. So, but there's no just quick silver bullet that's going to fix all this, but you never know. Yeah. Ann talks about battery. Maybe one day we're going to wake up and Bill Gates, who I know is an investor in some sort of a battery project, we may find it. I mean, we didn't know that we could, for example, develop a vaccine in 1 year. People said it was impossible. So we don't really know. But the idea of doing research, I think R&D is critical by everybody, by businesses, by government, by everybody, to be able to come up with a plan that can make us put us in a better position vis-a-vis the environment. And I also would tell you this, I think that there's been a big group that's been left out of this discussion. That's the faith community. I mean, I'm talking about the real faith community, not the ones who want to be in a pulpit and practice politics and raise money. I'm talking about the real faith community. And there are people who worry about the uh, the earth was created by God, and we are to be stewards, not worshipers, but stewards of it. And I think that faith community coming in, bringing a moral purpose to what we need to do, I think would be very helpful as well.
I
And
can
there's been,
say, just to jump in on that, I totally agree on the faith community. And we have found, sometimes in distributed solar, we're in the middle of fighting with utilities quite a lot. We're trying to sort of upend the monopolies. And that's very, very welcoming to some conservatives, I'd say. But also in some of these debates that we have in different states, the faith community representatives often do come out in favor of clean distributed resources because they really want to bring, well, one, the concern over protecting the earth. I would say the same with some of Native American communities as well, and that we have an interest in people being able to also play a role in it, like the whole idea of independence and not being reliant on some big entity that isn't listening to them, that is possibly polluting in their community, is gaining a lot of traction as people realize that they have the power. A decade ago, you didn't have a choice, right? You wanted to turn on lights in your house. You really didn't have a choice, but now people have a choice. And I think that as they see this and they start to see the impacts, particularly in a place like a Texas, where I'll tell you, after that terrible situation, our web traffic went off the phones were off the hook. It was just so much interest by people saying, you know what, I don't want to rely for the well-being of my family and my community by a big entity that is not going to be responsive to me. So I really think there's something here in us really trying to reach out to people who may not have traditionally viewed themselves as environmentalists or as renewable energy people, to realize that there's actually jobs and there are opportunities to contribute to your community and protect your family.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And what I like about that is it's the bottom up approach. We have a tendency in America to think, well, this will all come from the top down. It will not work that way. Right. So that people who, if you take the issue of recycling, for example, where we have a broken recycling system in the United States, and I know much about it because I work with a company that is trying to fix this problem. But as people participate in terms of being cleaner, right, in terms of recycling, or you drive an EV and people ask you about it, or any of the things that we can do where people say, well, I can do something here. As a community, I'll give you another one, would of course be clean water. I mean, we take a look at Flint, Michigan, and we see the disaster and tragedy there. People start demanding these things. I want clean water. I want clean air because my kids got asthma, or I have asthma. And by the way, I drive an electric vehicle, or I'm active in terms of recycling. It begins to drive a movement that we all can support, and any of the wars that exist with people who just deny that there's a problem. And it's little things that add up into big things that move the wheel.
Well, I have a good
what I
analogy.
hear you both saying.
Oh, Amanda, if I could give one, because I heard it from one of my team members today, that it's relevant to the title of your group. In World War II, when there was a shortage of food, and people in the United States were, resources were going and being focused on the war, people created their own gardens and they called them victory gardens.
Right.
And there were thousands and thousands of victory gardens where people were creating the gardens to feed their families, but also to share and to be an alternative source of supply. And so we started thinking about this as, well, we're sort of solar victory gardens in the same situation. We are trying to encourage customers or people who want to help meet this need for clean power, and to do it in a way where they can also provide a benefit to the community, to our society. And I think that there's just a lot of power there if you think back to what people were able to do when, as a country, we really had to come together in a big way and marshal our resources and marshal our support. And that is really, I think, what World War Zero is calling for too, is like, how do we actually take this to a more significant level, but do it in a way that engages people to be part of it.
What I hear you both saying is that solar and distributed renewable energy equates to personal resilience, security, safety, and it really taps into a sense of freedom and against a sense of future security, and that can appeal across party lines to consumers, also to community resilience, to networked kind of hives of solar homes that can feed and support each other, and again equates to security and resilience. I'm curious too about this timeline. We've heard from some, significant portion of scientists have said that they're concerned about climate delayal as a form of climate denial, that we need to be net zero by not by 2050, but by 2030, which is, of course, 9 years from now. So can we speak to this timeline? How significant, how ambitious do we need to be in our timeline? Starting with you, Governor Kasich.
We need to hurry up and take our time.
Please elaborate.
I mean, we can have lots of big dreams, but if we don't have the way to do it, it doesn't work. And if you try to put round pegs in square holes, that doesn't work either. It has to be a growing consensus that this needs to be done, and needs to be done as quickly as we possibly can do it. But it has to have buy-in. You can't just have you can't have a split among political parties, for example. If people just say no, no, no. I mean, you have to bring everybody along, because all change comes from the bottom up. And I think we talked about this with, Ann and I, just the discussion we just had about how that happens. So, you're not going to go down here and tell everybody you're going to have an electric vehicle. While we see, in California, when I go out in the Silicon Valley, I see everybody driving a Tesla. When I drive around Columbus, Ohio, which is a hip and happening town, not so many. So we have a ways to go. And, to start ordering people around to get things done, yeah, there's regulation, but a lot of times regulation doesn't get you. You can't always regulate a fact that people need to understand what their responsibility and what their actions can do to contribute to the greater good. So I say, hurry up and take your time, because if you don't have something that's going to work, I'll give you a good example. If you have to transport carbon in order to sequester it, to bury it, you got to build a pipeline. We don't have a pipeline today, and frankly, try to build a pipeline in America today. So it's a long way between the lip and the cup. And I know there are a lot of people that won't like what I'm saying. And what I found is this, sometimes with the environmental community, if I tell people 90% of what they want to hear, I'm their enemy on the 10% that they didn't get. That's not a way to do this. It has to be done with leaders. It has to be done with consensus, and it has to be done in a rational way that people can say, yeah, do I want to be able to control more the power that gets used in my house? Absolutely. And by the way, if I buy an electric vehicle, will I be able to charge it up, or am I going to be stranded somewhere? These are things that have to be answered, and we'll be there. We'll get there. We'll get there in time. And there's going to be breakthroughs that we haven't even imagined. And for the business community, who are now committed to the environmental side of ESG, you're going to see significant progress.
And so, Governor Kasich, do you agree with the commitment to 2050, net zero by 2050, and do you see that as achievable?
We have all kinds of commitments we make. We had Graham Rudman as to what we were going to do to meet deficit goal targets. We created goals. You know how long they lasted? So yes, it's a great goal. We ought to be at 2050. I think we can get there. But you can say 2030. Why don't we just say 2025 while we're at it? So, but we got to be practical in the way we're going to get there. That's why I say, hurry up, but take your time.
And what's your take on the timeline?
It's interesting. I've always been a little bit skeptical on the big goal numbers too, somewhat similar to the governor, but I do think they're really important. And I do think the science is telling us that we're in a very urgent situation and that we do need to make progress between now and 2030. So I'd like to see, I know our company, is committed to, I think 2040 as a net zero. It's important, right, to have those goals out there. Because it's a goal, if you don't have a goal, right, you don't really know what you're driving towards, and it can, people can organize around it. I think that what I have the greatest hope in, and I hope this, bipartisan audience appreciates it too, is competition. I think that competition is going to be so key to this. And it's one of the reasons, before I was a regulator, I was a utility executive, and my experience in a competitive company that's driving this change compared to some of the very important work that utilities do was night and day in terms of the way people wake up every day trying to figure out how we are going to do it better and less expensively and sort of push that envelope. And what we need right now is innovation, not just in the technology, which we've had some and we need more. And I think you're right, the issues with lithium, there's like issues that we need people to drive towards, but also, innovation in the way that you sell to people. One of the reasons that Sunrun's history is it was a financial innovation. It was an innovation to allow third-party financing so that more people could afford to put a system on their roof who didn't have all the money up front. That's an innovation. And every week we have these meetings and we're driving for innovations. And that's what we need right now. And that's one of my concerns. I think that we need to have policies that continue to encourage competitive markets in energy and that continue to enable competitive providers to participate, and that we don't just go to, we're going to stick with the large scale utilities and power companies that built the centralized system, because the centralized system is not going to solve this problem. We're going to need more. And so that's my view. If we want to hit those targets, let's encourage more players at the table and let's get competition to work to get better solutions.
And Amanda, one of the things that I tell my friends who are less skeptical than they were is, with the virus, we developed a vaccine. We destroy this earth. We destroy this environment. There is no vaccine.
Right.
We owe our children and our grandchildren. This is why it's World War Zero. This is why we have to move as fast as we can. I just want to be clear, though, that, and I think Ann said it great here in terms of the innovation and the research that has to happen. I absolutely believe that 2050 makes sense, but let's be focused on what we're going to do tomorrow to try to bring this country together to get this stuff done. Because once you go over the cliff, there ain't no coming back. And there are too many signs today in the world of the negative impact of carbon and what's been happening in our country. So let's hurry up, but let's take our time to get it right.
In terms of tomorrow, what federal level signals, such as carbon pricing, do we need to put into the economy to speed the shift away from fossil fuels? What do you think of carbon pricing, Governor Kasich? I know Don Kerry's been a proponent, and carbon tax, or whatever form it would come in. How politically feasible is it? How important is it?
Depends what you do. If you have a carbon tax like George Shultz and Jim Baker proposed, they were one of the first ones to do it, both Republican secretaries of state. They believe that the money that is raised ought to be rebated to families. On the other hand, is it possible that you could divert some of that money to do some infrastructure that we want to do to take care of some things that are necessary? Do I think that would pass the Congress today? No. I mean, with any bipartisan support, very little. We got a lot of work to do. Part of the purpose of World War Zero is try to bring people together and convert some people who have been skeptical for a while to say, hey, come on, wake up. This is for your children. And the other thing is, one of the greatest hopes we have, I think, in this country is the role of young people to bring this issue to their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents, and to say, don't do this to me. You remember what Thunberg did, where she held up the sign in front of the parliament and said, you don't have a right to destroy the earth that I'm going to have to live on when you're gone. It was a little bit more delicate than that, but that was the message. And she created a global movement. So I see everything moving in the right way. I see the business community moving in the right way. I see communities moving in the right way. I see young people moving in the right way. And I think over time, politicians, particularly those who are conservative, are going to have to get with the program. That's what I see.
Governor Kasich, if carbon pricing isn't feasible tomorrow, do you think it could be feasible in the next few years, in the next, say, 2-3 years?
A good plan. Again, I think a good plan that focuses on the grid, on renewables, on storage, on charging stations, on carbon sequestration, on all those kinds of things, distributive energy, all that. Yeah, I think that is all doable. We just have to convince them. Look, there was in Science Times here, Earth Week, a tremendous issue about it explored all of this. How serious is the problem? Is there really a dispute? How do we know climate change is really happening? It's education, and it's being able to go to people and say, you have a responsibility. And frankly, I would love in the faith community, the churches, the synagogues, all over this country to dedicate a day to talking about the creation, the book of Genesis, which was the creation of God, of everything that we have on this earth. And the fact is, we have an obligation and a responsibility to take care of it. So let's all of us get with the program to take care of it in any way we can. And I love that idea about the victory gardens and the victory environmental things we can do in our communities.
Speaking of the earth itself, Anne, you are a graduate of, among other prestigious institutions, Cornell University, where you advise the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. I'm curious to hear your vision for building a clean agriculture economy, because we know that, of course, farmland and forests can be carbon sequestration sinks.
Right.
What role can agriculture play in solving the climate crisis, do you think? And how best can the federal government support that role?
Yeah, no, I'm really a proud alum of the ag school at Cornell, and they have a new dean who is very focused on climate and a lot of work, not just among New York State as a land grant university, but also across the world. And so when we have these meetings, we're often talking about, the other side of this issue, which is we know that climate change is going to hit the poorest people in the world the hardest, right? And so what can we do to support sustainability? So I don't have all the answers on it. I certainly think some of the things Governor Kasich mentioned earlier about having, good agricultural practices and ensuring that those don't have a negative impact on the environment. But, what really needs to be done is to be looking at these options. And I know Cornell and other land grant universities are doing that about, how do you grow sustainably? How do we ensure we have the right food supplies, given the droughts, given the challenges, given all of these storms that we have? And then, as you said, the role that agriculture can play so that they can serve as that carbon sink. So I do see a huge opportunity for the Department of Agriculture, for Cornell, for Davis, is Ohio State the land grant university in Ohio,
Yeah,
Governor?
we are. But as I mentioned earlier, and the farm runoff problem is very severe all over this country. And the application of fertilizer and what they do, there has got to be management plans for agriculture and farmers all across the country without them fearing that we're going to come in there and kind of take over their farms. And we don't want to do that. Just want to make sure that they have good practices when it comes. So it's something we really have to deal with as well.
I thought we would just end on one vision or vignette or comment on what makes you most hopeful.
What makes me hopeful are the young people everywhere I go. They are the ones that are really keen on making sure that it's not just about money, it's about values. And one of the most important values is taking care of our environment. And that gives me reason to be very optimistic. Young people always are the ones that bring about change.
And
well, I'm going to say the same thing. I've been really fortunate in leading this policy team at Sunrun, where we attract these incredibly mission-oriented young folks who are all growing a little older with me right now. But the fact is that there are so many people out there, young people, who really want to engage in sustainability, in clean energy. And I think the message to them, whether they're Republican, Democrat, what have you, is that there is a big table, there's a big amount of opportunity, and a great need for engineers, policymakers, filmmakers, so many places where people can bring their talents. And so I do feel optimistic, and I think the Sunrun story is an optimistic story, created by two graduate students 12 years ago who saw this as something they wanted to do and started at a farmer's market selling solar. And look where we are now, where we're across the country and just beginning. So we're just at the beginning and appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone wants to learn about distributed energy, please reach out because we're looking for more people to join our forces.
Solar victory gardens. And I hear you both saying that the clean economy is the biggest job creation engine of our time. Thank you both for your time and great insights, and happy Earth Week to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.